who already have been here for the last talk and the last question round. Our next speaker already introduced himself, so good for me. So. He's working at the moment as a business unit manager of Aalborg University, and he says about himself that more than 25 years of experience being an entrepreneur has left him with 3 kids, a few houses, and a line of successful and unsuccessful businesses and a great life. And what he's doing in his life, he's building bridges between research and businesses, and that's as well something he brought here to us today. And now it's your 12 minutes.
Thank you very much. Okay, how about disrupting early stage investments? This is kind of a big task for all of us, especially in Denmark. It has been a big task, and to set the cultural mindset for universities and how to take out businesses from the universities and use their knowledge. We have created in Denmark, we have 8 universities in Denmark, and the 4 of the universities has created kind of a model for how to take out and how nationally take out and compare new startups or possible startups within the university. I work out of Aalborg University, and Aalborg University is placed 450 kilometers straight north of here. And it's actually a great university. We ranked in the field of engineering as the 4th best university in the world. And in Europe, we are number 1, rated from an MIT report last year. And we use a kind of teaching method called PBL, problem-based learning. That's where you put groups together and they learn together. And we've had great experience with that for many years. But many of the other universities, they're pretty much doing the same thing now. So we have to figure out new ways of being not better than the other one, but better at cooperating with the other ones. Being a serial entrepreneur is very, very different from the job I do today. So coming in from the field of building up businesses to work in the area or in universities and together with other universities is quite another thing. It's very, very different. What we do is that we go out into the university and then we find tech people, or we find the heroes, and we connect them to technology, which connect them into business. We connect them into users. So the field we are working in is actually the field here, which gives us a lot of possibilities, but we have also learned a lot of how to work and speak with the researchers at the university. If you look at a normal researcher in a university, they have a kind of a silo thinking. They are very much into deep tech, they are very good at deep tech, but the commercial part is very, very strange for them. They do not know what to do if they want to commercialize an idea. So we are thinking in a way of training these persons to understand, and we're training them to meet entrepreneurs. That could be investors, that could be many commercial persons in general. We talked to one of our partners in the project is US Berkeley in the States. They are living in the Bay Area, it's in the San Francisco area. And they have actually worked with the Silicon Valley way and worked with the experience from the Silicon Valley way of doing businesses and taking them out of the universities. And they have found they have pretty much the same side of this. They have just a little more experience than we have. The tech guy, the researcher, is thinking in the silo. And then what we do is that we find a person that is fit to the technology that we have here. And we actually kind of stretches the commercial knowledge from the researcher and outwards. That means that we can make a solid business here, both commercially and also when you think about the technology that they put into the real world. This mindset here is actually how we work together, or how the culture in the university is today. probably also in Germany, I don't know. But you take a researcher, you put them into a lab, they'll be there for 5 years. They do all the journals and what they are expected. Even they do it better than they should do. But they come out at the end and there's no commercial usage for the projects. Only in a few cases somebody picks them and say, come out here. But it's very rare. They have to have an extremely good idea. At Berkeley, they have actually worked on how do we create the best way of taking out businesses out of research. And they've figured out if you are a single person or a single person with a CEO with no real commercial interest, you can actually accelerate a project pretty good. You can accelerate it up and get a turnover. But if you put together a team of co-workers working together on the research, so you have the silo thinking and you also have the commercial side, you can actually generate a much better company and much more sustainable company, which will grow to be a big company eventually. The ecosystem we work in is that we have taken the 4 universities in here. We have Aarhus, and we have Aalborg, we have ITU, and we have DTU. DTU is kind of the big tech thing in Denmark. But to talk a little about the sizes of the universities, we have, here is about 60, 70,000 students, and they're placed in those universities. What we then do is that upon the universities we build a business hub or digital hub where we take in investors, and also we keep a lot of information around what's durable within the GPR rules. We take them in here, and then we actually push out all the ideas we get. That means that we make videos with the persons or the researchers and the idea they have, and then we push them out in the society. And if somebody is ready to take in a task or ready to take in or commercialize an idea from a researcher, they can actually go in and talk to the researcher. We'll help them meet each other, and then they can do kind of a business plan together. And we will, of course, facilitate that. When we do that, there's a lot of things in the consideration. We in Denmark, or I think in Germany too, and also in the EU, we can get a lot of money into the projects. So we actually take the projects and we work with the soft funding area. That means that when they have the idea, we bring the idea forward until we have to go into the hard funding. The hard funding is when you take up ownership. The soft funding is where we have no ownership. But it's a balance. It's a very thin line you have to walk there. And we facilitate that line so that we can create the very best and most sustainable companies within the future for the companies or for the researchers. We have actually heard that Denmark is a good place to do this because of we can work with the soft funding model. We can actually take, or we can actually fund and produce a company at a much cheaper price than if you go to Silicon Valley. They actually say it's the dollar to the krone. That's 6.5 times cheaper to do that in Denmark than it is in Silicon Valley. So there's rumors about somebody wants to go there and actually look at the ideas we have in Denmark.
Yeah.
A little commercial. So what are the cases we have, and what do we do at the universities? I have a case here. You're probably wondering what has AI to do with all that, and you have to imagine that when you have researchers and when you work with students in the universities, AI and machine learning and these things are a part of the normal agenda in the universities today. I asked the professor simply, why don't you have an education for AI, or why don't you have an education for machine learning? He simply said, we use it in the education work where they need it, and we use it within the normal project learning. An example is that we have a company that came out of Aalborg University. They wanted to make a satellite but they want to make the satellite smaller. So they produced a new rule that said, we want to make a cube. It's 100 times 100 times 100, not 12, 12, 12, but 100 times 100 times 100. And they made it into a standard. So we can actually produce, or this company can produce small satellites and put them out into to orbit. And they can be out there for a tenth of the price of a normal satellite. And as we all know, the electronics and the AI and everything you put into these cubes get smaller and smaller. So it's actually durable to put nets of small orbit satellites into space. This was founded and started up as a university project, and in 2016 they went to the stock market. It's directly from the university. We also had another very disruptive unit, which was you use the MR scans for your heart diseases, and by using sound, the sound actually can measure how the heartbeat is done. So they measure the dum-dum, the sound of the heart, and by that they can actually measure out by algorithms and AI how it sounds by putting a little sticker on. So this one can actually go out to the doctor, so the doctor can do the MRI scan of the heart with a precision of 97% today. And this is a great idea, which is much, much cheaper than putting out, people to hospitals. So they have put this into, they have done it, they have put it out on the Nasdaq market and actually put it out and got money from there. So it's quite a successful story. I actually think I got through it faster than I thought. So I leave the 1 minute to the next one.
Thank you so much. Very cool. Thank you for your insights into some of your projects you have there. And perhaps for you or the next speaker, 7 minutes now. Do you have any questions?
Since when are you doing this?
We have been running this project for 2 years now. And what we have figured out in the project is that the change of the mindset by the researchers is absolutely the most important thing. You have to move a whole culture around this thing, taking research out to business. So it's actually not just a task you do. It is building, the next generation of researchers and how they think commercially. And there's a lot of benefits to this because we produce around just in our university, we produce around 850 PhDs a year. And we know that only 20% of these will go out into the industry. But being a researcher, going out to the industry is two very different things. So we actually, by thinking commercially, they actually have easier access to go into to work in a normal company. So I think.
Okay.
Very interesting. What would you recommend Germany to adapt from that Danish model? Because I think we have to do something more in terms of entrepreneurship or from the transfer of universities to the outer space, so to say.
I have heard that it's a rigid system you have in Germany, and I think that projects like the project we are involved in should be or could be something that you look at in Germany and say, this has some beneficial advantages, but there's also things around it, that doesn't work. It will always be like that. But I think there's a few things that you could use in here, especially when I talked about I ran pretty fast through the ecosystem, but the ecosystem is actually the backbone. It's not just the universities that have to understand the mindset of working. It's also outside. The entrepreneurs, the small investors, they have to understand how do we get in there. And just recently we had a meeting. We have something called the Lund University in Sweden. They actually, they have a lot of medtech. and they have actually joined up with a stock market exchange company. So they have actually got money from the stock market and into the projects. They have raised 30 companies just in Lund University. And we are actually talking to them about that. So we are also trying to learn in Denmark from the Swedish system and how they interact with each other. So probably you should both look at Denmark and also how they do it. It's just small bricks to build the Great Wall.
How do you measure success? I mean, you can put soft funding into anything and then have 2 companies on the stock market. I mean, how do you measure your success?
We measure, it's very simple, but it's not doable. We measure in how many companies did you start. That is, this measure is made by the Industry Foundation of Denmark. They are a big supporter of this or sponsor of this project. But this is not the right way of doing it. The right way of doing it is to measure how many people get out and get a job afterwards. Like, how do we get out the PhD into the right jobs afterwards? So because they're still this silo thinking. They have to know about commercialization, because there's a huge difference in between research and development. They don't understand it. And they need to understand it to make themselves valuable for the companies they go out to, or the company they will create if they create one.
So from my experience, one of the most critical environments is helping companies who could be future customers or partners of these upcoming tech firms to understand how a young tech company works and to help them understand their mindset and vice versa.
Yeah.
What if you, in 2 sentences, if you had to describe what is your secret sauce to make that happen, what would you say?
In 2 sentences.
How do you connect corporations and young startups in a meaningful way? How to make that project, this platform, successful, if you have to say a very short way?
We actually have a thing that we do in our project that's called students or researchers in residence. So we actually put in researchers into a specific project within a company. And they can actually go, if they want to, they can go kind of hand in hand. And if the project works out, and it works out beneficially out, they will of course stay in the company. But if it doesn't, they can actually go back into the university and play a role there. So we are trying to cope with that, and it is quite difficult, but it's one way of doing it.
Okay. How do you deal with IP?
That's an excellent question, but I work in the out of the patent and commercialization office at the university, so it's specifically what you're asking me. How do we cope with IP within if the researcher have an IP, it's actually by law a thing you have to protect in Denmark. I assume you have the same law here, but it's pretty common in Europe. But the IP goes into the office, and then we do a licensing agreement with the IP. The university pays the IP, take them into the different stages.
Thank you very much, Gert. Thank you for your time, and you will be around for some more questions about IT or whatever is coming up. Thank you. There will be a short break, and then we are up with the 4th speaker.